A Riddle in the Middle of the Way by Dr. Alon Giladi. Between Science and Faith, on scientific, moral, and faithful logical fact. On all the facts, all of them.
There is no essential difference between a scientific fact to a moral fact to a faithful fact, neither from a logical perspective nor from a faithful perspective, neither from an abstract conceptual perspective nor from a tangible conceptual perspective known to man. The opening position for this first chapter is entirely opposite to the formal position of Leibowitz, but on the other hand, it stands in line with the clear and unequivocal position of his teacher and rabbi, the Rambam. The time has arrived to put an end to the dead-end development of the theory of wisdom and the theory of morality, as well as the theory of faith in its shades and types. A time for everything and matter in the world of the is, and so too an end and a new old beginning in the middle of the way. It is inconceivable that in the 21st century, the technology will continue to gain momentum, and on the other hand, man will go in a dead-end way in these critical matters to his ultimate purpose and to his future as a thinking human being, and as a human being in general. This inverse process, endangering the future of man, necessarily invites a response, a research which will examine the possibility of changing his course in an essential and exemplary manner. A response whose reasons will constitute an objectivization of its object and not reasons of such or another utility in its basis. This response is revealed from the refutation of the formal position of Yeshayahu Leibowitz in the subjects of the morality and the faith together, and the connection between them and the world of science. This is not a response in a banal, erroneous, and anti-rational continuation known from generations of the denial of God. On the contrary, this is a response seeking to prove literally, in both senses, the matter of the corrected return of the rational God, and at the same time of the objective morality. At the beginning of this argument, I seek to determine that from an abstract conceptual perspective, there exists one and only truth, and not a relative truth. This is the absolute, inclusive, full truth, which man aspires to its recognition. And at the same time, by definition, it is not given, and forever will not be given to man. Every scientific fact known to man, which I will define as an objective description of abstract or tangible matter, or of a law discussing the relation between the materials, is necessarily a non-truth in its absolute sense, since the truth, necessarily, is not given to the knowledge of man. And all this why? Because from a logical thought perspective, there exist in the world of the is infinite scientific facts necessarily connected each to the other, whether from near, whether from far, and the infinite necessarily is not given to the knowledge of man as himself, who is finite and part of a finite reality, including that which is revealed in his existing thought. From a different point of view, it is possible to try and claim that man is part of the is, and the products of his consciousness, whether they are science or morality or faith, also they are part of the is, and by definition, all the reality of the is that he understands. It is according to his own understanding necessarily. But as said, I discuss the approach of Leibowitz, and in his own point of departure and not of others, which it is not man and his thought. Furthermore, regarding all that concerns the world as itself, which necessarily preceded in a logical manner the world of the is, there is not and forever cannot be for man any knowledge. There is not and cannot be for man recognition for that which is beyond the recognition, from the very fact that it is beyond the recognition. Leibowitz claims that to be distinguished from a scientific fact, there is not to be found a moral fact, which I will define at this preliminary stage as the worthy relation from an objective perspective between man and/or between man and other matter. But this claim is refuted also from within its own foundations. The knowledge regarding the existence and the description of a scientific fact, as well as regarding the existence of a moral fact, its source is in the thought of man. The thought of man is performed by man, although not as a closed system. as much as it is performed subject to the laws of the being, whatever its name may be in the eyes of the observer. There is not and cannot be an essential difference between a scientific fact and a moral fact. This, as well as this, can never, from the perspective of man, reach the whole of the truth, although in an essential manner there exist scientific facts and there exist moral facts. This, as well as this, can reach the truth in a certain approximation, which possesses a point-like dimension in relation to the whole entirety, on the condition that they shall be revealed in a similar manner from this perspective, that they shall be revealed by means of a thesis allowing to refute its determinations in an empirical and universal manner. This revelation is, in practice, an experiment in materials, or an experiment in thought, meaning by means of internal or abstract materials, which we believe that they are correct for all, a matter which also it is not known to us in a certain manner. True, the abstract materials are different from the tangible materials from the perspective of man, but also the materials involved in one scientific experiment against another scientific experiment. Both of them are forever different from each other. The materials involved in the revelation or refutation of a moral fact from the perspective of the thinker are the human beings and the other materials, and the relation of the thinker toward them, and this in order to examine what is worthy or what is correct to act from an empirical point of departure of the custom of man. And I will require to this in more expansion later in the words. Therefore, the finding of the moral facts is much more difficult than the finding of the scientific facts, for to the thinking man there is not known, apparently, a creation of science more complicated than man, and also the definition and the examination of the worthy relation between man and the materials in general, and to human beings as the most complex creation of matter known to him, are necessarily more complicated and more difficult to attain. But on the other hand, the pretension of man to claim that because he does not know or struggles to prove or to understand the moral fact, behold, this fact is not to be found at all, and it is given to the subjective will of each and every man, is in the nature of arrogance, as far as it concerns the theory of wisdom, and even heresy as far as it concerns the logical faith. The reason for this is since the determination according to which there is nothing new under the sun necessarily includes, but not only, the base is which the material nature and man included within it, as a living and thinking matter, are situated in it and constitute a part of it. A scientific fact and a moral fact deal therefore with materials and with the relation between materials. Materials more or less complex, but with materials in the world of the is, and I will touch later in expansion on the exemplary definition of the morality, and also on the issue of the free will, as a corrective introduction to the expansion on the issue of the worthy, faithful logical relation of man to the being, which is in its inclusive essence, the undefined God. In contrast to the scientific fact and the moral fact, the faithful logical fact deals with the worthy relation between the peak of the matter, man, and between the being in the world of the is and God from the perspective of his trail in the world of the is, a relation which is, in practice, the worship of God. From a logical perspective, a faithful logical fact is not different in essence, to be distinguished from in definition, from a scientific fact and from a moral fact. The reason for this is because from the perspective of the being of the is, all that is situated in the is regarding its relations and its description, including in relation to the being in its entirety, is part of the is. In contrast to this, from a faithful logical perspective, the faithful logical fact is supreme over the scientific and the moral fact and includes them. The reason for this is because the faithful logical fact deals with the relation of the peak known to us of the is, man, to that which by definition includes the is and is more extensive than it, and therefore from its very essence is not given to definition, to be distinguished from the scientific and the moral facts dealing with the is itself. The faithful logical fact deals with the relation between the matter and in its supreme manifestation known to us, man, and between the faithful being, which by definition is not given to definition, since it necessarily includes the is, but is not included in it and is not identical to it. Therefore, the understanding and revelation of the faithful logical fact, which of course will never reach and cannot reach exhaustion, is difficult and supreme by definition from the other facts included in it. And the reason for this is clear. In order to reach a level of understanding in approximation, even if a distant approximation, of the faithful logical fact from its aspects of the is, which they and only they are given to the revelation of man, it is worthy for man to engage both in the aspects of the science and the theory of wisdom in relation to materials, and in the relation between the supreme living materials known to us, meaning human beings between themselves. But in order to reach a level of understanding and approximation of the inclusive, faithful logical fact, on man to approach not only to the truth of the is, but also to its relation toward the truth, which is beyond the is, which by definition is forever not given to him as itself, to the status of man before God. On separate spheres and that which is between them, on the faithful logical fact.
As said, the formal position of Leibowitz regarding the matter of the relation between the science to the morality and to the faith is entirely different from my position. But it is worthy to emphasize already now, I do not discuss positive descriptions, polished summaries, and also not agreements or disagreements, but first and foremost, refutations. My claim is that the foundations and the conclusions of the formal position of Leibowitz are refuted of themselves, also according to his own system itself. According to Leibowitz, a scientific fact is a given matter regarding which there is not and cannot be a dispute, as long as it was not refuted. Although he certainly believes in a fundamental manner that every determination in this field is erroneous in an inherent manner, since the entirety of the factual data are not given and cannot be given to man. According to his system, a scientific fact is an objective truth given to refutation by means of an experiment, etc., or in his own words, in approximation. This is a reality forced upon man, given to him without a volitional decision regarding it. In contrast to this, according to his system, matters of morality, such as the valued decisions regarding the good and the evil, are given to the subjective will of man. In his opinion, there is no law that can include the will and the decision of one man regarding his worthy way toward his fellow as preferable in an objective manner against the will and the decision of another man regarding this way of his. According to Leibowitz, every man can decide whether he will be a villain or a good man, whether he is a mass murderer or a defender of the people, and no man can say in an objective manner what is correct in this decision and what is not correct as an objective truth until its refutation, characterizing the scientific fact. The good and the evil are, according to Leibowitz, non-objective definitions of man and are given to his subjective wills. According to his claim, the subjective basis of the human soul is not understood and cannot be truly understood to man, as this matter is expressed also in the psychophysical problem to which I will refer in the next chapter. According to Leibowitz, a man can claim that the value of the adoration of the Japanese emperor is the supreme value, and another can claim that the value of the dignity of man as he is the supreme value. In his opinion, there is no possibility to decide who is right and who is not, since it is about a subjective, volitional decision only. From here, the way is short to the claim, according to Leibowitz, that Hitler was a moral man, and perhaps of the highest degree, because he acted according to the value that he believed in, and acted for its realization until the end, literally in both senses, both from a personal, literary perspective and from a leadership perspective. True, Anyone who opposes the possessor of a value, like Hitler, must fight him until his absolute elimination. But from a conceptual perspective, according to Leibowitz, it is not possible to claim that the Nazi value is not correct, and the humanistic value is correct. The value, according to Leibowitz, is the subjective decision of man according to his will. This position is erroneous from its foundation and calls for an ordered and systematic refutation. As was noted already in the past, I will return here and emphasize: a bad result of a theory in the eyes of the observer is not a cause at all for its cancellation, but it certainly constitutes a cause/trigger, although not an essential reason for a careful examination of the possibility for its refutation. The essential reason for the examination of the refutation of any theory is not rooted in its nature in the sensory eyes of the observer, but in the very fact of it being any human theory. In a faithful, conformist manner, the approach of Leibowitz, who is not a humanist, is clear and even makes it easier for him to remain rational and faithful together. If the will is not subjective, behold, necessarily, seemingly, there is not and there exists no free choice, a matter which, of course, the Rambam rejects within the framework of an explanation which on its face is not most convincing on its face, to say the least. How much more so is not exemplary, that is, that the will is outside the field of definition and understanding. If everything is objective and given to scientific explanation, behold, there is created, seemingly, a logical difficulty to claim that the Jewish faith is the faith of truth, since an immediate conclusion is that there is no free will. In the absence of free will, in the absence of free choice, there is no essential cause for the obligation in the fulfillment of commandments, the worship of God, etc. For seemingly everything is forced upon man, and this without requiring the pilpulim, casuistry, of the parable of the judge and the defendant, namely, that if everything is forced, then also the decision of the judge is forced, and so on. And therefore there is not in this to contradict the need to choose, which also is forced. Indeed, goal-dependent will is separate, and proof-dependent free will is separate. This formal position of Leibowitz is seen as goal-dependent and not as dependent on the search after the truth, which he preaches for in practice. As far as morality and faith are not explained in a logical manner, they have no meaning of significance from a logical perspective, beyond their meaning toward the subject, according to his own taste. A direct result of this is necessarily that also the formal position of Leibowitz is his personal taste, which is devoid of significance of importance beyond his own taste. I will refer to this in expansion, also in the analysis of the psychophysical problem standing at the basis of his attempt to prove this argument of his, from an Enlightenment logical point of departure, leading his approach to a maze without an exit. But even without requiring at this stage to an analysis from an Enlightenment point of departure, I will claim already now that the approach of Leibowitz contradicts itself from within itself. The reality forever conducts itself according to acts, and it is understood by thought, which also it is an act. When a man rises every day to worship God, according to the way of Leibowitz or according to any way that he will find worthy, if he will find worthy, his eyes do not behold laws or instructions, but the act of the reality reflected before his eyes, which does not include the reality of the undefined God. Therefore, it can be claimed that the way of the supreme thought, seeking to approach the understanding of the act of the reality which it will never understand in its fullness, is worthy to be conducted as the reading of a story act and an attempt for its understanding. And as much as the story act will be closer to the story of the reality, the true objective rational, so will its roots deepen in the thought of the people, which is an inseparable part of it, and even constitutes, as far as is known to us, its peak. But as much as the story of the reality surrounding us conducts itself according to its way, so also our story, we the human beings, includes within it a story of human reason, seeking to understand, again and again and again, the meaning of the story of the reality, or to decide regarding our position toward it. This reality as itself, from a logical factual point of departure, includes within it necessarily the laws of science and our values and our faiths, and this without expressing a position on the connection between them. The analysis of these components of reality, the science, the morality, and the faith, from a logical point of departure, contradicts the basis of the approach of Leibowitz, who declares himself as one who is not a humanist, as one for whom man, from his perspective, is not in the center, but the undefined God. What of it, that if man is not in the center, but the undefined God? Behold the denial of the connection between the science to the morality, and how much more so, with the faith, cannot be based on a logical point of departure only, which certainly is not the being of God, according to the faith of Leibowitz. The denial of the connection between the faith, the morality, and the science, according to a logical humanistic approach, as the way of the formal Leibowitz, can be claimed when the one claiming it sees man as himself, or in his thought as itself, as the center of the being, or as a point of departure for his approach, that then the thought of man might be perceived erroneously as separate from the world of the seemingly silent nature, as not given to definition. This matter is given, in my opinion, to a clear contradiction, mainly because a logical point of departure necessarily recognizes that a man is subject to a logical being, which is necessarily subject to the laws of nature. In other words, if I think, therefore I exist, then there is no difference between my scientific thought to my faithful or moral thought, all subject to the same laws that I am subject to. Hence, that which is worthy for the action of man who is part of the world of nature from a logical point of departure is a fact that is not different in its fundamental essence from the other facts of nature, and therefore, in relation to the being of the is, he is, in his essence, a fact, although not a priori, as the conclusion of Kant, and not a subjective decision, as the claim of Leibowitz. In any case, the Cartesian point of departure is not relevant to the view of the essential Leibowitz, who does not see man as a point of departure, but the God who is not given to definition, and whose worship for its own sake is the ultimate purpose of man. Also here, I would dare and claim that the approach of Leibowitz to the absence of connection between faith and science is clearly opposed to a faithful point of departure which he advocates, although he does not define it. In other words, the claim of Leibowitz for the difference between science to morality to faith is refuted from his very own system itself, from his own point of departure, whether logical or whether faithful. The reason for this is utterly simple. God, according to Leibowitz, is not given to definition, for we have no part and ability for a part in that which was before the act of Genesis. At this point, I will already note now that within the framework of this composition, I will not require in a deep manner to the dispute regarding the existence of God. This composition deals with the thought of Leibowitz, and according to this thought in its formal and essential meaning, as one, all those claiming the death of God, his being a fiction, a human invention, an illusion, etc., are the successors of the heretics of their generations. The difference between Pharaoh and Moses is as the symbolic difference between Spinoza and the Rambam. Man as a point of departure, and even center and supremacy, or the undefined God. The identification between the necessary, undefined reality in a logical manner of the being and between the undefined God is therefore a foundational assumption in this composition discussing the thought of Leibowitz. In the continuation of the words, I will note briefly that the existence of the undefined God is a requested and necessary conclusion specifically from a logical, objective perspective, compared to an opposite conclusion, and this in adaptation and in modern continuation to the thought of the Rambam, Aristotle, and of Kant on this point. In any case, if any part in that which was done after the act of Genesis is given to definition or to a claim as a fact, behold, it is not possible to claim that another part is not such. Every claim according to which a certain part of the world of the is given to objective definition, and another part is not given to such a definition in a fundamental manner, is seemingly heresy in the faith for its own sake, since it creates a problematic parallel between the God who is not given to definition and division, and a domain in the world of the is, which necessarily is given entirely to definition, to be distinguished from the essence of the reality of God, which is not given to our recognition. From here it results that if, according to a faithful logical point of departure, all that is in the world of the is necessarily given to definition, behold, there is no difference of significance between a fact concerning the silent, inanimate in the world of the is, to every other component from the world of the living, including man, including the worthy rules of custom for human beings. But more than that, from within the refutation of the claim of Leibowitz for the distinction between a scientific fact to a moral fact, there arises and ascends a new old fact, a faithful logical fact. This is the fact regarding the worship of the undefined God, the worthy, correct, true worship of God, that which will never reach a rational exhaustion, which is a fact regarding the worthy relation of the is to God, which is necessarily a fact including the other facts, and brings man closer to the truth that will never be attained. I have shown, therefore, in a general and preliminary manner, that from a logical point of departure, there is no difference of significance between a scientific fact to a moral fact, or a fact from the field of the theory of wisdom. Also, I have shown that from a faithful point of departure of Leibowitz, the reason of man serves him as a tool for the understanding of the world of the is, to be distinguished from its being a goal or a point of departure in adaptation to a humanistic approach. The reason of man, in a logical manner, is the tool given to him by definition for the understanding of the world of the is. The reason of man, by definition, cannot be required to the definition of the undefined God, who is situated by definition beyond his recognition. Hence, all that is given to man in the world of the is, including the faith, which is as itself part of the world of the is, to be distinguished from its basis, which is not such, must be understood entirely by means of his reason, in a logical manner, on its inherent limitations. Hence, we must act necessarily in a logical manner also in the field of the faith, or in other words, in a faithful logical manner. From here results also that alongside the scientific fact and the moral fact, there exists also a faithful logical fact, referring as the word of the Torah to the trail of God in the world of the is, to be distinguished from his face, which are not given to our knowledge, although they are an object for the aspiration of man, which will never be attained. The understanding of the reality given to understanding in the world of the is, which is the entirety of the reality except for that which is beyond it, or that which includes it, is done by us by means of our reason. But any such understanding that is not given to refutation, or that does not lean on logical proof, is nothing but a flying crow, urva parach, baseless. So regarding the understanding of science, so regarding the understanding of morality, and so also regarding the understanding of the trail of God, the world of faith for its own sake, the world of the worship of God, the world of the status of man toward the undefined God, This conclusion is reflected from the non-formal thought of Leibowitz, and it is reflected from the manner of his consistent analysis regarding the books of the Torah and the Tanakh, to be distinguished, for example, from the descriptive and comparative analyses of his learned sister. It is reflected from his reference to the other religions. It is situated in his absolute and unequivocal negation of the mysticism, including the Kabbalah, and it arises from its undefined, by him, point of departure of his view, meaning the undefined God. But more than all these, this is the conclusion reflected from the refutation of the formal claims of Leibowitz regarding the absence of connection between the world of science, the world of morality, and the world of faith. The system is found in what seems seemingly as a lack of system, due to the absence of a thinking, rational, researching observation in what is laid before our eyes. This is a refutation coming to reveal the laws, which are between the revealed things, after thought on the things seen in science, in morality, in wisdom, and in faith, by means of the logical thought and the faithful logical thought about them. The Bible, Book of Exodus, chapter 33, verses 20 to 23. Thou canst not see my face, for man shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, Behold, there is a place by me, and thou shalt stand upon the rock. And it shall come to pass, while my glory passeth by, that I will put thee in a cleft of the rock, and will cover thee with my hand until I have passed by. And I will take away my hand, and thou shalt see my back, but my face shall not be seen.